I'm very grateful for the opportunity to move this adjournment debate on an issue that I know is of great importance to communities in Ceredigion, but also, as is evidenced by the attendance of honourable members present in the chamber this evening, those communities across these islands. We face many pressing challenges as a society. The health and economic consequences of the COVID-19 pandemic have been debated earlier today, of course, but just as pressing are the devastating impacts of climate change. If we are to meet these challenges and ultimately emerge stronger, more secure and more prosperous, it is vital that we transition, and do so rapidly, to a society that is powered by energy generated from renewable sources. There is good news, Mr Deputy Speaker. Villages, towns and cities across the land possess incredible potential for community renewable energy projects, such as solar arrays in fields, wind turbines and hydro units in rivers. These local, community-owned renewable energy projects support local skilled jobs, offer local economic opportunities, which will be much welcome, of course, in the face of the COVID-19 pandemic's impact on so many of our communities.
Will you give way?
I will.
I'm grateful that he's giving way. Bath and North East Somerset Council is working very closely with Bath and West Community Energy, and these partnerships are incredibly important for getting local buy-in. But does he agree, in order to get that local buy-in, it really has to work financially as well for the people?
I'm very grateful to the honourable friend from Bath for making that point. She's right. It has to be viable for these community schemes and partnerships if they are to make to fully realise the potential that so many of these schemes possess. And I've put on record one local energy club and partnership in Cardigan, in my own constituency, who I know are trying to grapple with some of these challenges. Now, I will, of course.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy. Can I also personally congratulate the honourable gentleman for Cardigan and bringing this forward? Can I also say that I agree with his comments about community groups and the opportunity? So does the member not agree that these monopolies of service provision by greater companies must be brought to an end, as we see many local people attempting to expand business, being precluded from doing so by legislation which seems to be put in place only to frustrate and to allow for competitive provision? Thank you.
I'm very grateful to my honourable friend for his intervention, and I think he's got to the nub of the issue, actually, and anticipates the main thrust of the argument I wish to make this evening. I think that at present the regulations and the way in which legislation has been structured is perhaps outdated and does disadvantage some of these smaller generation schemes. I suppose a lot of these points are actually touching on the fact that what we are seeing has been, since the 1990s, a transition to the way in which perhaps energy and electricity generation has been generated and also transmitted across the country. This is changing, of course, and will need to change even further. We're moving from an electricity system consisting of a small number of quite large power plants serving a passive population to an electricity system of potentially thousands, if not millions, of smaller generators, storage and active demand, complementing huge numbers of large-scale renewables. The question that arises from this shift, of course, is that whether a system of potentially millions of moving parts can be managed in a centralised way, even if we wanted it to. Local generation to meet local demand, I believe, offers a possible answer. Yes.
For giving way, and congratulations on securing this debate, which I think is of utmost importance. Would he agree that the fantastic community projects like Sheffield Renewables should be better supported by government to provide local renewable energy, and should see their support much more enhanced as we try and tackle the climate emergency?
I'm very grateful to my honourable friend for making that point, not only because I think it's an important one, that we do need to make sure that these community schemes are supported, but it also anticipates where I want to take my speech next. So I'm doubly grateful to my honourable friend, because the potential capacity of local community-owned energy is quite astounding. This potential has often been commented as being frustrated by some of the rules that we've already heard honourable members refer to tonight, these antiquated rules that govern our energy markets, that were designed primarily back in the 1990s, and rules that were, quite frankly, suited to a different system of large power stations and a handful of utility companies. Now, unfortunately, these rules still rule roost today, and they do create insurmountable cost barriers to any community energy initiative that wishes to sell the electricity it generates directly to local households and businesses. The most effective solution, in my opinion, would be to introduce greater proportionality to the licensing system, to ensure that the costs and complexities of being a licensed electricity generator are proportionate to the scale of its supply. Now, if these costs are proportionate, it becomes financially viable for smaller scale renewable generators to supply electricity, and in turn for new community-owned schemes to become viable. I will, yes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just in terms of, you may be aware that I chair or jointly chair the APPG for left behind communities, and I think that there are many opportunities for that in these communities. In my Sedgefield constituency, obviously there's things like heat from mine workings and these sort of things. Would you agree that these sort of innovations can come through this channel much better than others?
I'm grateful to the Honourable Member for making that intervention. I think he makes a key point here that as part of the transition to try and help decarbonise the economy, there are also a lot of benefits in terms of economic development of areas that, such as yours, likewise, perhaps been left behind. And I think this does offer so many opportunities that we would do well to make the most of. I would.
For giving me his honourable friends being very generous with his time. And isn't it also the case, as we're hearing from all these interventions, that there are local groups and bodies around the country who are desperate to have these opportunities? Partick Community Council in my constituency, which is an urban area, very concentrated, but keen to find out how they can innovate and how they can use the abilities proposed in the proposition of the bill.
I'm very grateful to my honourable friend for making that point, because he is right. There is so much potential across these islands, and if only we can sort out some of the obstacles that they currently face, I think we could really kick up. I would, with pleasure.
Honourable Member for securing this debate, and he refers to some of those obstacles. Would he not agree that one of the ways to overcome those obstacles is for the 10-minute rule bill that I presented in the summer, which has due to have its second reading on 29th January of next year, that is passed into statute, whether through the private members' bill route or by the government adopting that bill?
The honourable member for Waveney, because I think he has done incredible work in bringing forward the 10-minute rule bill, which I know has the support of a great number of honourable members on both sides of the House, and I would very much want to put my support on record for that bill, and I do hope that if it's not something that is progressed as a 10-minute rule bill or a private members bill, that perhaps the government will look to adopt some of the provisions itself. I'm very grateful very willing to give way.
Very grateful to the Honourable Member for giving way. So we've talked about left behind, and we've talked about the real desire for many communities to get involved. I just want to think about the left out and how important it is that the community energy sector is inclusive. So right now 4% of practitioners in the sector are Black, Asian or minority ethnic. And I would ask the Honourable Member if he would pay tribute with me to the organisation Power for People, who are themselves working to ensure that they represent those groups that are currently underrepresented in this sector. Thank you.
I'm grateful to my honourable friend for that intervention, and it gives me the opportunity to place my own gratitude on record to the campaign Power for the People, who actually this debate probably wouldn't be held tonight if it wasn't for the support and some of the leadership that they've shown in recent weeks. So I'm very, very pleased and to put that gratitude on record. Further to the point that my honourable friend from Waveney made about his 10-minute rule bill, the provisions would allow electricity generators to become local electricity suppliers by applying for a new form of supplier licence that is more designated for local supply. And in advance of this evening's debate, Mr Deputy Speaker, I've been contacted by members from all political parties who are supportive of those measures, but unfortunately they weren't able to attend, and some of them include the honourable members for Tewkesbury, for Thurso Moulton, Carmarthen East and Evor, and also Nehallen and Inyar, Bladen and Glasgow East, to name but a few, but there are, as I say, 210 I think in total. A right to local supply would help support local energy businesses to create jobs by selling energy to local customers, to retain significant additional value. Yes.
I don't want to anticipate where he's going with this list, but one of the key opportunities that this presents for our communities right across these islands is to allow for more entrepreneurial councils to generate electricity locally to communities, like the Chief Executive has suggested in Angus Council. Does he agree with that ambition?
I do agree. The opportunities here are many, and I think if we were able to address some of these regulatory barriers, it'd be a win-win for all involved. To draw my remarks to a conclusion, Mr Deputy Speaker, you've been very patient and I'm grateful for it. If we were to introduce a right to local supply, it will help local energy businesses, municipalities, as was also mentioned. It will retain a significant amount of additional value to local communities and inject much needed resilience. I will.
On that particular point about additional value to local communities, in my constituency of Clwyd South, the Corwyn hydroelectric project is part of a wider series of community efforts. And I think the benefit of what he's proposing is that it not only helps the hydroelectric project, but will incentivise wider activities within the community as well.
I fully agree with my honourable friend from Clwyd South. Because there would be quite a range of benefits. You'd have, I think, greater public support for the transition to sustainable energy forms, improved air quality, nature-friendly renewable energy generation, and obviously, quite as important, is a secure energy supply that is less dependent on imports. Let alone, of course, the more effective energy system, which will see perhaps consumers' energy bills decrease as well. So I hope, therefore, the government can consider establishing such a right to local supply, and specifically the workable mechanism for it laid out in the Town and Rule Bill of my honourable friend from Waveney, which, as I said earlier, is supported by over 200 honourable members of this House. And I'm sure that together we can enshrine this right to local supply in law and make the most of the many opportunities that it offers.
This was almost a record, maybe. Congratulations, Minister.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, thank you very much. I was going to make very much the same point. I would like to congratulate the Honourable Member for Ceredigion for securing today's debate, and I will make the same point that you made, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I've never seen an adjournment debate with so many interventions, and they were all extremely gracefully and graciously accommodated in your speech. So many congratulations for that to him. The Honourable Member has spoken very eloquently about the need for local communities to be able to supply electricity in this instance. And I think there are strong arguments in his favour. I know that many people across the House have expressed to me and expressed to the Department similar views. And I'm fully aware that my honourable friend, the member for Waverley, has also done his bit to try and drive this issue of local supply up the agenda. I will give way.
Is he not aware that the main problem is that of a level playing field, that just basically the smaller providers cannot compete with the bigger providers, and therefore we need this change?
I'm fully aware of that, but and I'll come later to my remarks. I've only got 10 minutes, so bear with me, but I will address that point later in my remarks. I have to commend the Honourable Member for thinking very deeply and creatively about this issue. And I feel that this is part of an ongoing conversation, because he was quite right in his remarks at the beginning to say that a lot of the structures that we have today do reflect conditions and circumstances, certainly before we legislated for net zero, and in many cases they reflect conditions that operated 30, 40 years ago. And so there is an ongoing discussion to be had about how best to adapt our institutions to modern circumstances.
Should legislative changes be required, how best could we, I think the support across the House has been demonstrated this evening, best work with the Minister to carry through any changes that are identified as necessary?
Well, I think a very good start is a debate like this. I think this has been a real eye-opener for me. I'm delighted to see visually so much interest. And I would suggest that people engage with the department, engage with me. I'm very happy to discuss these issues. I think they're absolutely fundamental to the energy transition that he mentioned. And I think, as I've said, this is part of an ongoing conversation. So in conclusion, I think that what we have to focus on is the flexibility of the whole system, of the current regulatory regime. And I think if we get that right, then we can bring the innovation and perhaps some of the decentralisation that the honourable gentleman and among other people, other members, honourable and right honourable members of this House, want to see. I think that the prize, the prospects are considerable. I think we could see innovation, we could see growth, we could see cost reductions and carbon reductions, most fundamentally. And I think that with a cooperative spirit, we can actually get very far.